Hey, Darwin's answer. Thanks for that response. I think I would agree that this notion of scientific validity is a separate issue from the assimilation of the knowledge into society. The issue with validity is, for sure, the measurements that physics, chemistry, the hard sciences apply to their observations. They are valid. They line up. They are accurate. The question is, though, what do they mean? And there's always a certain amount of interpretation that goes into a scientific theory. The experiment provides a certain amount of data, and then based on the data that is available, a theory is constructed. A paradigm is constructed. A set of hidden laws is deemed found, and the theory sort of, you know, makes them explicit. And that making it explicit requires that it be put into a meaningful context, that the data be put into a meaningful context. And meaning isn't something that a scientist can just create. I mean, he can speak his jargon with his other close association of scientists about some specific issue that they've basically had to invent their own language to describe. But for that to mean anything beyond those scientists' conversations, it has to be assimilated into the society. And even those scientists, they're still human beings, and their understanding of the significance of their work is going to be somehow a reflection of their cultural identities. But I suppose sometimes, something like the atom bomb is invented, and most people don't know how it actually works. So what it means that the atom is split. Uh, I don't even know the detailed physics behind it, and yet it's the fact that it exists still affects all of our lives. Uh, so there's a scientific elite that has the knowledge to create the technologies that affect the rest of the world, even though the rest of the world has no access to that level of truth, of the correspondence between the plans to build a nuclear bomb or something of that nature. So as far as this measurement being a metaphor business, you asked if a metaphor or if a measurement is not a metaphor, what would be the difference? And I think it would be that, okay, a measurement that is not a metaphor, or that purports not to be a metaphor, would be, I'll call it a concept. And I just talked about this in a video earlier today. Where the concept implies some kind of transcendental um, structure that is objectively true in some way. It's a form, an eternal form, an eternal idea, like a Platonic idea. And those kinds of concepts may not, in fact, exist if we look at the way that human beings actually think about the world and understand the world, and derive meaning from our experience, because we can't understand what something means unless we have a metaphor to describe it, because the metaphor is what connects it to the body. A concept is sort of this spiritual, in the sense that it's intellectual and separate. It's immaterial. It's not involved with time and decay and anything um, fragile and material like the physical world. It's intellect. It's airy and mechanistic. It's perfect, eternal, and that kind of knowledge. We may not have access to that kind of knowledge. Um, so to say measurement is metaphor is to say that even what are decimal places really? It's because we have 10 fingers that we have 10 placeholders in each, that's our set of units, our standard set. Um, math is Carl Jung talked about math as an unconscious archetype that was stabilized by external symbols, and the collective unconscious, where all these archetypes well up from, is stored in. I mean, you could say it's our genes, it's our biological history, and our family ancestry, because it's all stored in our physical structure. Or you could say it's our cultural history, and the way that the language gets transmitted through people, that these ideas somehow get wedged in the words as they get passed along, and the same ideas sprout up again and again. Um, and measurement is just another one of those ideas. And it seems to be certain, like mathematics is certainly a very accurate and unique type of archetype to have stabilized with symbols, but it's still just an expression. There's no math in the world itself, and the digits that we write, on our computer screens or on a piece of paper, has no real significance outside of the agreements that we all hold about them, to assign meaning to them. I just wanted to read a couple sentences by Rudolf Steiner about natural science and its relationship to humanity. Without detracting in the smallest degree from the value of natural science, we might ask, what does it bestow on humanity? Especially, what does it bestow on man in order to help him solve the riddle of his own existence? Natural science tells us much about the interdependence of the phenomena of nature. It reveals much regarding the physical constitution of the human being. But when it attempts to tell us anything about man's innermost being, science overreaches itself. It can give no answer to this question, and it shows ignorance of itself when it even attempts to answer it. So I would have to agree with Steiner's view there that science is definitely valid in its own sphere, and it should retain that validity, that conceptual, logical structure that it has amassed, all those measurements that it has articulated are valid. The problem comes when all of the data gets interpreted, because inevitably the scientist has to interpret the theory. And the interpretation requires that it be given a metaphor. And the metaphor is always going to be experientially based. It's going to be existential. It's going to have some relation to the person's life, not just to their ideas. So I guess what I'm really saying is that science should always be practiced within a certain context. And the context is existence, your existence as a human being. Because even as a scientist, you're a human being before you are a scientist. And as a human being, you have an obligation to be true to your experience. And I think, maybe I'm being optimistic when I say this, but I think at the root of everyone's experience is a sense of duty towards others or towards the human race, and to do what's best for the human race. Even in those of us whose desire is a little bit perverted as far as the means go, I think the end, everybody agrees on the end. And that, there's a kind of a mechanistic view of science that's sort of held in esteem now, and that view thinks that we can have objective conceptual knowledge that can mean something. But there's also, A.N. Whitehead has a philosophy of science that's a lot more participatory and organic, which means he admits we can't have objective knowledge of anything. We're participants in everything we attempt to know. So we have to learn to be more observant, in a sense, more objective and unobtrusive and unmanipulative of nature. Because the real magic of nature occurs when we don't interfere with it, when it's not in a laboratory.